Good evening, my historical and philosophical friends. Thank you for listening to the podcast. Welcome to episode 62, entitled Wrestling with Multiple Choice, How We Teach Students to Think, Not Guess. You are trapped in history with me, your host, 17-year history teacher, Robbie Malcolmson. Tonight we are going to philosophically and historically, of course, wrestle with the often dreaded multiple choice part of teaching AP courses, or really any kind of public education course in what you're doing and having to battle constantly with multiple choice, but especially history multiple choice with AP classes. Hopefully by the end of this first episode, you will understand why it matters and you will feel more confident when you're either teaching or you are attempting to succeed on a multiple choice test if you're listening to this from the point of view as a student. Now, this is part one of a two-part short series about strategies and tackling multiple choice and me using what I use in the classroom. And I've been able to see some success the last couple of years of using that, and the overall passing rate for the students, for them, and their potential is increasing, especially since the multiple choice part of the AP exam weighs so heavily at 40%. So this next episode will focus on, or the next one after this one, we'll focus on doing an example together and breaking down a source line, a document, and 3 to 4 questions that often complement the aforementioned document. And in that episode, I'm going to be honoring the man who originally trained me in AP at a training in 2018, which a lot of AP teachers were familiar with him, and that is famously Larry Treadwell, who also had the website called The Cave. And he had done this source that involved the witch. If any of you are listening to this that had ever had him in a training, you know he does the Walpurga Hospenin, the witch trial sort of source, which is an excellent source that I always use every year to introduce sourcing all these skills to my students on the first full week of school. So anyway, let's dive on in and look at why multiple choice often feels so difficult and why it actually reveals student thinking. And I've often been one of the biggest critics of multiple choice questions on tests. I've told my students many times that if I wasn't forced to, I would be doing essays and short answers and Socratic seminars rather than doing multiple choice. Because sometimes answers on multiple choice, depending on the type of test, can be somewhat misleading on what the data may give you, especially if you have a standard that's only tied to 1 or 2 questions. Well, they miss that one question, and all of a sudden it looks like they failed that standard. So it's very delicate, the balancing. And I feel like AP does that relatively well. They even give teachers the percentage of the balance of how much of every unit or time period is on the test in like an even manner, which I think is at least a great way of being transparent. And I'm not being paid or commissioned or sponsored by AP at all. It's just me saying that when I first started teaching the course and they brought that new binder in after 2017, the course guide, it is a very helpful source to have when you're first ever teaching AP, because it basically breaks down everything that you have to do. And I think that's an excellent way to do, especially for new teachers coming in, because as many of you know, it can be very overwhelming at the beginning. So for one thing is I believe that multiple choice questions are often the most misunderstood part of the AP exam, and I include myself on that for a long time too. The myth is multiple choice often causes some students just to start resorting to guessing, especially whenever they are very difficult sources. And they're meant to be very challenging and seemingly random as far as the points of view of who's doing the sources. And this is where your skills and your content knowledge and context comes in and helps you so much. So in reality, what I was wrong about for a long time is that multiple choice questions actually expose what students know and assesses whether students can do these 3 things. And that is, can they read historically? Can they contextualize evidence? Can they eliminate claims and not hunt for trivia? And you may have asked this question at an APSI training, like I have at all 5 of them that I've been to before. And that is, how do I actually teach kids to get better at multiple choice? And one of my friends and an excellent teacher and trainer is Kenneth LeSage. I had him twice. I'll never forget in my first training, I asked him this, and I'm paraphrasing here, but I asked him that question, how do I actually teach kids to get better at multiple choice. And he said, well, whenever you discover that or find out, just let me know. So it was a nice, humble way of saying that this is something that a lot of the AP teachers have battled with. And I thought, with not that many AP podcasts out there for teachers and students, I thought I should really start to do a little bit of a deep dive on multiple choice and what I've learned from people like Steve Heimler on Heimler's History, who has an excellent video on breaking down multiple choice questions. And this is why I'll often rephrase it in class as the Heimler method, even though it's not its official name, but it's often easier for kids to remember strategies by giving them kind of a name. And it also attributes the strategy to who I learned it from. Now, he may have learned it from someone, or that might have been his original way of teaching, but I wanted to make sure, especially as a history podcaster, to give credit to who inspired me to start giving my students this particular kind of method. And then I just add some extra things in there along the way, but the strategy is kind of formed around his strategy, and how I exercise it in class is the more unique way of what I do. And that's what I'm going to share with each of you. Okay, so let's dive in to that Steve Heimler, the Mr. Heimler framework about teaching students how to read before they actually attempt to start answering. And this is where, it's basically emphasizing that this is a method. It's not meant to be like a shortcut. It's a disciplined way of historically reading, especially under a very stressful time limit, because students have 55 minutes for 55 questions. You don't have an opportunity to sit there and overthink. You really have to be able to read through your choices and kind of go with your gut instinct, as long as your gut has been modified and molded throughout the year with your skills and your content knowledge. You have to be able to trust your instinct as you're going through on that. And it's one of those things where, it's important to try to make sure that when you're reading these, read these like a historian and not like a test taker. It's not like test taking strategies like the way you would see on ACT or SAT. It's a little bit more deeper than that. So to start off in that Heimler method, and it's the method that I also use on my students, is that when you first see that paragraph or that picture or that map or that political cartoon, whatever that might be on there, the instinct of a lot of students is to jump right in like a linear narrative way of reading a book and to start reading the paragraph and then look at the source line, which is often located either below the source or above it. I've often seen it below, and that's where I put it on mine, to kind of remind students to be able to kind of go and look at that. But Heimler brought this up, and I thought this is an excellent way of bringing it up for students, is you should always read the line of attribution, or the source line, as I call it, first. It's not decorative, it's a map. It is a way, as Heimler says, of gaining contextualization, to gain context from reading this. Because by reading this one line that's on there that has the author's name, the author's title, the title of what they are writing about, or to sometimes whom they are writing about, to it has often the date or the century of when it was written. And just glancing at this might give you an idea of when it is. So for example, I'll do an easier one. If you were to see a paragraph and then you skip down, you see Anne Frank, and then it says like Diary of Anne Frank, and then it says like 1941 or something like that. So immediately, if you know your content knowledge, you're like, okay, it doesn't matter whether or not I know Anne Frank's name. Often it's going to be a very random kind of person on there, or a modern historian that the name. So it's not always name recognition, but seeing the title and looking for keywords in there, or seeing what kind of a writer it is, or more importantly, seeing the century that it's in, helps a lot. Because I can look at the date and go, okay, I know that World War II and the Holocaust were going on at that particular time in European history. So now, before I even go to the questions, before I even go to the source of the paragraph, I'm already reading it with the mindset and the lens that this is going to be about either World War II or the Holocaust, or a little bit of both of those things. And it can help the students kind of picture that. And sometimes you can read the source line and maybe you still don't know, but it's at least worth doing that particular strategy. So for students, this is what they should look for, is who wrote it, who wrote the document, or who created it, who painted it, who took the photograph, whatever it might be, who made the political cartoon, when was it made, not necessarily remembering exact years, but knowing centuries. Now, I do recommend remembering the key years that bookend each of the time periods in class. For example, 1450, the Italian Renaissance; 1648, the end of the 30 Years' War and the Peace of Westphalia, changing the balance of power in Europe. You have 1815, which is the fall of Napoleon, the Congress of Vienna, the Concert of Europe. You have 1914, which is the beginning of World War I; 1945, the end of World War II; 1991, the end of the Soviet Union on there too. You know what I mean? Like you kind of find these windows, but I've learned to try to teach kids kind of remember things by century. If you can sort of have themes to know what's going on in the centuries, although it's not always that clean, it will often help a lot. So the when is very important. You also have the where, if that's located on there, and the type of source. Is it a speech? Is it a law, code, or an act? Is it a letter? Is it a diary? Is it a painting, a propaganda poster? Is it a treaty? Because what type of a source it is, what medium of a source it actually is, what medium it's on there, will tell you a lot about the intent of that source or what's the purpose of doing that. For example, if it is a report, I didn't mention the word report yet, but more than likely they're trying to find data over something going on. Let's just say it's someone like Flora Tristan trying to study women in factories. And they may be doing a report, so then they report to usually a government source. In her case, she was a socialist writer, but you may have a committee that's doing a report. Well, then they're probably reporting to a government parliament or something like that, and it may be for the purpose of lawmaking, and that could really help a lot. So I think it's very important as you're going through the school year, as Kenneth LeSage says, you don't have to make it obvious, but hide the vegetables in the mac and cheese. I love that saying, and that is, weave in these skills just as you're doing your day-to-day activities and routines, and eventually it just becomes second nature. I think for most of my students now, topics like HIPP, and all these other skills have become sort of routine every time that we do any kind of a source in class. And what Larry Treadwell had told me before in the past, as cheesy as the statement is, it's really good. It says a document a day makes the DBQ okay, the DBQ being the essay that is 25% of the AP exam. And if they can dominate that, they can probably do really well in all the other writing portions of the exam. But today we're addressing multiple choice, and so we are in part 2 as well. So again, start with the source line and what it tells you, and then think to yourself what cannot be true, which centuries are off the table then, which themes are most likely in play here. It's very key to have maybe a list of themes for every unit that you have, and I have that I put together and made with the help of sources from other people and with my own kind of organization from the AP course guide. If any of you would like to have that copy, please feel free to reach out to me on the contact information on the show notes, and I'd be more than happy to help you out on that and share that with you. So think about this. Before students ever read a word of the document, the source line is already whispering the answer within terms of context. And sometimes you can get lucky. Every once in a while, you might not even be able to read the source at all and still be able to get the question right because you know the context so well. Not every question asked according to the source or based on the argument of the writer. Sometimes one of the 4 questions or 2 of the 4 questions might be a contextual question just in general about the time period, like a historical development or something like that. So read the question also. So after you do the source line, go straight down to the questions. Do not read the paragraph yet. Go down to the questions. And this is the purpose of this is to shape the reading. So when people are reading, like Heimler says, you're actually reading with the purpose of looking for that evidence. So think about that. Students aren't reading for everything. They're reading for a specific task, a mission here. And looking for common AP question verbs like best explains, most likely, caused by, illustrates continuity in, challenges which claim, examples like that. And try to have your students underline the time frame and the task in the question before reading anything else at all, at least being able to do that. So then after you're done doing that, then you move to the document, whatever the said document be. But don't read for meaning, read for evidence. Look for things that will answer your questions. Try to work on teaching students, and this is why I want to lead to one of the examples that I do in class that I did not get from another teacher, and that is something that I call multiple choice Mondays. So, for example, tomorrow I'm coming back from Christmas break. We're going to start Unit 6 and contextualize the beginning of Industrial Revolution, the transition from the enclosure movement and the agricultural revolution into urbanization, these kind of topics. And we will do like a source, and there'll be 3 to 4 questions that are off that. So whatever like short little lecture I may have for the day, we then bookend that with a paragraph of some sort. It could be a primary source, a secondary source that really kind of hits on that, and then we practice that strategy at least once a week. So think about that. Over the course of the year, they're constantly practicing, do this, then do this. And what we'll do the first few times, we do it together. Because I often love doing them as a class discussion for the reason I'm going to go into a little bit later. So, again, read for evidence. Teach students to think about what is the author trying to do? What is the author's purpose, as we would say with the hip? What problem are they responding to? Who benefits if this argument is accepted? Think about the intended audience and the purpose, the point of view, the historical situation, all of these type of things. Now, this is where we are not passively just consuming a source, a document. We are truly trying to wrestle with it quickly, of course, pushing back, questioning motives, noticing silences. And this is where you do this out loud for a while. Hell, even do it the whole first semester if you have to. If you're teaching the whole year like I am, or if you're teaching a semester, then do it for the first 9 weeks of that period. Is just practice it together, and then eventually you have them do it on their own, and then eventually finish the year by continuing them to do it under a very strict time limit. Like if there's 4 questions, they have 4 minutes, go. I hate doing time limits, but it's just the reality of the thing is by doing these little things without a strict grade on there, you can kind of build that resilience over time. And as they get better, their confidence increases as well. At least that's what I've been seeing the last 2 years from students and what they have told me as we've gone through stuff. So while you're looking at, if you've read the source and you look down at your answer choices now, this is where you go to that part. Try to start off, as Heimler says, by trying to find the 2 obvious wrong answers first. We will often do this in class. I'll say which one are the 2 most sort of BS kind of answers. And these are often looking for like action words or action verbs. You can also look for what's called absolutes. I always tell students to look for these. They see one of these, more often than not, they are wrong, if not always. And again, no pun intended, but one of these absolutes is a word like always or never, only, solely, strictly, immediately. These kind of words, they're often highly inaccurate. So if you're a student, if you're a teacher, these are great distractors, but try to stay away from these. Eliminate those right away. I also look for action verbs that may overreach what the person's actually trying to do in the source. Words like ended, eliminated, destroyed, increased, decreased, advocated, abstained, etc. And then also look for what's called chronological traps. And I've seen this a lot here lately. Events that come later, that don't happen within the source that's on there. And then ideas that have not yet even developed yet historically. Like maybe you're reading the Walpurga one we're going to read about in the 1600s. Like 1640, something like that, 46 or something like that. And then it may have an answer about socialism. Like, okay, so we know socialism is not a historical idea developed until much later there into the 19th century in the 1800s. This is where knowing contextualization can help students so much and for teachers so much as they're going through these. And as a teacher, I recommend challenge yourself. Use AI to help create you use a real source, but have it create you some questions, and then tackle it like the way you teach your students. And then you can see where you get caught up on and you get stuck on. I'll do this every once in a while because I like doing a source that I haven't seen myself, and I don't have the answer key. So I tell the students that, hey, we're all wrestling through this together. Help me figure out the 2 wrong answers and which one the other ones are. So we also want to separate what's called the distractor answer, not just the 2 BS answer choices, but why the 2 answers are so difficult. And again, the key distinction here is the distractor is often true-ish. It may be true about its statement, but not the correct answer in a truer context, or not addressing the question, not necessarily true about what that particular person is trying to achieve in their document. So it's one of the things you'll see. This is where students often will tell you, I'm stuck on these two. Well, more than likely, they're stuck on the distractor and they're stuck on the correct answer. And that's where I tell the students, if you are, slow down real quick, real quick, slow down. Sounds ridiculous, but to slow down and go back and look at the question again and then read those answers. Which one more accurately answers the question? Or which one more accurately represents what the author, whatever he or she said, to be more true? So it's important to teach students which answer truly matches the source's timeline period, which answer aligns with the author's purpose, and which fits the bigger pattern of that historical era. Students don't need to prove the correct answer is perfect, only that is less wrong than the others. Now, content knowledge still matters. Me and Kenneth LeSage were talking about this recently. Another thing that makes multiple choice so difficult is that content does matter. Like, you do need to know the content and you need to be efficient in your skills. And with the abundance of content in any of these AP classes, that is one of the most challenging parts. So if you're getting one that you just don't know the content on, well, that's when you have to really lean into your skills and do the best you can at using the process of elimination effectively. And this is why practicing it every once in a while through the year on at least seemingly regular, consistent basis will help reinforce and foster those habits. So you have to think about this as ask yourself why multiple choice success and what it actually depends on. It depends on knowing the centuries code. I mean, I think you need to know the centuries very well, from 1400 all the way over to the 2000s. I think the test questions will stop around 2001-ish, around that area. Sometimes there are some questions that will go all the way up to 2017 or 2021 or something like that. Recognizing big turning points. It's another reason why we have those bookend dates that are between each of those three main time units in AP. And understanding big unit themes are important for a multiple choice. And this is what I practice on at the end of the year. You also want to emphasize these skills with multiple choice: continuity and change, cause and consequence, and comparison across regions over time. Strategy helps students survive the test. Content helps them dominate the test. Those are your students that will probably get 4s or 5s hardly without your help. They already have the ability to go gain that content knowledge, but showing them those skills can really be the difference between that 4 and the 5, or the 3 and the 4, or the 3 and the 5. So another thing is, HIP is not just important for DBQs. It's also important for the multiple choice. And again, that is the historical situation, the intended audience, the point of view, the bias, the purpose, and even the limitations of a document. And every multiple choice question is secretly testing one of these particular ones. Students who name the skill see patterns faster. Like they can catch it without seeing the intended audience. They can tell right away, oh, this is an intended audience kind of question. And this is why using the multiple choice exercises in class as a class activity, discussion, a jigsaw thing, then go around the room and kind of do things in pieces. It all helps. And I think that's why it should not be a busy work. Just do this under a time limit, then never talk about it. You should wrestle with it together to really help them build that confidence. So now, again, the reason why I've warmed up more to multiple choice questions, I think that they teach intellectual humility, the careful reading, the discipline under pressure, because whether we like it or not, all testing is done under some kind of pressure. And a lot of students just get in their head too much psychologically, and they think too much, oh my God, this is a test. If I fail it, they're not really using their skills and they're thinking about it. They're not being in the zone. The students that usually do well will tell me, I didn't even pay attention to the room around me or anything else. I was just kind of in a zone. And that's kind of where you want to get. But in order to get there, you have to have a lot of practice to do that and a lot of building on that confidence as you're going. So I would not avoid multiple choice questions throughout the year. I would not use only multiple choice questions just for your unit test or something like that. I would also weave them in every once in a while for an assignment. Maybe one assignment a unit could be a multiple choice practice kind of an assignment, but it should be wrestled with together, especially at least that first 9 weeks of the first semester to really build that. So remember, to kind of summarize here in more of a narrative format of these steps and wrestling with that source line. One of the biggest mistakes students make is skipping the source line, as it's just background decoration to some of them. But historians don't read that way. Before we read what someone says, we ask who is talking, when are they talking, and why are they talking. Like a French revolutionary in 1791 cannot be reacting to Napoleon. Napoleon's not until 1799. A medieval monk cannot be arguing Enlightenment rationalism. The source line quietly rules out entire universes of wrong answers before the document even begins. There's also the importance of elimination is an act of historical judgment. When students look for the right answer first, they often get overwhelmed. But when they hunt for the wrong ones first, they slowly gain confidence. Words like always, never, should make historians nervous, or at least skeptical. History, of course, is messy. Change is often uneven, if not always. AP knows this, and that's why absolutes are often traps. Elimination isn't a test trick, it's a historical instinct. The final point I want to make here is the difference between a distractor and the truth. The hardest moment in any multiple choice question is when you're down to two answers and both sound plausible, which often happens, especially to students who traditionally overthink. This is where thinking historically matters. One answer may be technically true, but not true here in this instance. Not true yet because of historical context, or not true for this particular author. The question, or the correct answer, doesn't just fit the fact, it fits the moment. So as a last list of advice, practice by historical skill, not by random sets. One day, do point of view and attendance questions only. Another day, do chronology and continuity. Students begin to see patterns in advanced placement logic for these kind of tests. Require students to say out loud, this answer is wrong because blank. We've been practicing that all year long, and it kind of builds that. It's kind of like I told students this before, because a lot of my students are athletes or things like that. They want to go to the military. Why do basic training? Why constantly train? Why, when you know something, you still train it? You still do the same drills and practice on there too, because it needs to become second nature. And in the game, I told one of my students who's a running back in football, I was like, he doesn't have time to sit down and annotate or do a Socratic seminar over whether he needs to juke or go left or right or over this particular defender. He has to do it by instinct. And to build that instinct and confidence has to be done over and over and over again over time, and making that more challenging. So it has to become habitual in a way. Silent elimination is weaker than spoken reasoning. This is why you can do these in pods together, like miniature seminars. Have a group of 4 or 5 kids to tackle one together, make them have to say out loud and make them write down, this answer is wrong because blank. And they can go around, take turns. And that way it's not on just that student as an individual to tackle those. It's a good way your first 9 weeks to kind of build up that confidence together before having them do it on their own. Ultimately, though, I do have them do it on their own, at least throughout the second semester, because they are responsible for their own exam later on. They have to be able to prove themselves that they can do it, not just rely on people around them. So make students write down their own distractors. You can do that as a strategy. Nothing reveals understanding faster. Students learn how AP starts to think. How can they make something true, but not true for that particular instance? Build century fluency. I have a game called Literally Centuries. I can share that with you if you would like the Google slide on that. Century guessing games, like my Centuries game, timeline races, visual chronology boards, anything you can do to visually enhance this, having a giant timeline in your classroom, whatever it takes. Also, try to normalize what's called productive struggling. Multiple choice questions should feel uncomfortable. They should not be easy. That discomfort is thinking happening, and they will eventually get more comfortable being uncomfortable. I hate to pull a little quote there from LeBron James himself back whenever he was on the Heat. My final thought for the whole episode, and then for once in a long time, we're not going to have any questions to end the episode with because we were doing questions throughout this. Multiple choice is not the enemy of deep thinking. It is the place where deep thinking is tested most honestly in some cases. When we teach students how to wrestle with questions instead of fearing them, we are not just preparing them for an exam, we're training them to read the world carefully. That is really, honestly, the skill. And that's something that I never thought of psychologically, philosophically. I have been an enemy of multiple choice throughout the majority of my career until the last really 2 years. So again, if I can change on that kind of stance, then you could change as well too. Or hell, maybe you even have a good counter argument on why it still maybe is not. So this has been around a 30-minute episode, which is about where I wanted it to be at. As always, I appreciate everyone's support for listening to this, to wrestling through these things with me. The next episode I'll record will be an example using the source of a testimony given by a licensed midwife named Walpurga Hospinen from Dillingen, Germany, who was burned in 1587. And I'll share the strategy that Larry Treadwell did with me and other teachers in that training, and then how you could then take that source and make multiple choice questions out of it and do it as a class activity together, just to be able to put this episode, which is more of a strategic one, and how to do it overall. And then we're going to do one together in part 2. I hope you all have a great night. As always, keep questioning the past in order to understand the present and be contagious.